Hey, what's up, guys? What's up? So we're gonna get back in the role of doing these OG chats on Saturday. I got kind of sidetracked with surgery and getting better and getting my feet back underneath me. And yeah, so we're gonna start doing these again on Saturdays, 10 p.m. Get back in the rhythm. This weekend, my buddy Drew's gonna hop back on. He was one of the folks we've already had on once, but it's always a good chat with him. What am I smoking on? Pineapple tart, but it's kind of weird. Like, I have a couple different phenos of the pineapple tart, and the pineapple tart, one of them is just like grape menthol. This one's more of like a kind of lemongrass pine. So what's going on, folks? Just a few minutes. Hopefully Drew will jump in here in just a minute. We'll have a little chat for the evening. Hope everybody's doing well, smoking well. We finally getting caught up on everything after the surgery. So getting this sorbet line out to everybody now. That's the next big project. Okay, so quick question. What kind of strains of my seed baker washers? So the short answer to that is everything that I breed has an eye towards hash strains. Everything. It doesn't matter, what direction I'm going. Number one is always how how's the resin? How does it wash? So the long answer to that is, there's a lot of my strains that wash well. If you're asking my favorites, I'm a big fan of the Blackout Truffle. Anything Nag Champa is usually a really good wash. The Terp Drip, any of that line washes really, really well. And I would say the new sorbet stuff would be another great place to kind of look. If you're looking for, washers or strains that are going to do well for you in the water. There's a few out of that. The Obscenely Sour Cross, is really dank. Washes really well. Big Fat Trikes. Tropic Driver Cross was another one that had really sandy terps, or really sandy trikes, fat trichome heads. Let me think. Really, man, any of those sorbet strains have done really well for people. Like, everybody loves the Nag Champa, which I'm kind of out of those right now on the website. But yeah, somebody just told me today one of their Nag Champa cuts did better numbers than they had ever done before. I'd have to look at what he said it did, but he was really impressed with it and said that, see, the big thing with any strain we're washing, it all kind of comes down to how well does the flavor hold up through the water, and then kind of how long or how well does that hold up after press if rosin's our finished goal. And that's a whole nother conversation. Like, just washes well and throws down a ton of resin is, everybody loves that, and that's great, and that's, but if it just has kind of a generic hashy profile and doesn't really have a whole lot of like flavor to offer after the press, then, it's one of those things where it's like, what's the point? It dumps, but it's not really impressive or nothing, nothing that anybody really wants to write home about. And so that's kind of the bigger question is like, how does it wash? How does it finish? How does it press? How much do you lose to the rosin press? It can wash well, and then, you lose a huge chunk of it to the bag or to the, it's just super waxy. So, you kind of juggle a lot of different things when you ask, how does it wash? Especially because with wash strains, you could have 10 or 15 phenos that wash well, but none of them, really have everything. That's kind of the juggle, man, for a lot of people that breed, and a lot of people that breed for, specifically for resin. there's a lot to unpack there. Quality of trichomes, how well the trichomes extract, how well they knock off. What's up, Mac? How well do they, how many dump? How well does it dump? What are the size of the trichomes? How do they press? How do they finish? What's the best wash strain is a tough question, because everything I breed goes kind of one of two ways. I'm looking for resin and I'm looking for oil content. So how much of that is terps? How much of that is, flavor? How much is cannabinoids? And then, how many trichomes? So does it produce a ton of resin? Does the resin break easily? And does that wash well? Does it come out in the wash? Does it press well? So, everything I have should wash well for you, man. I can't tell you everything I've ever done is going to throw down, 6%. But it's something that I think about every time I go into any cross, any strain, no matter what I'm doing. My number one goal is usually resin, and the number two goal is usually extracts. And, how well does it finish the job? Deep chunks, man. Everybody loves a deep chunk. I think we're seeing kind of a second wave of deep chunk catching on. It's a strain I've worked with for 15, 20 years in some capacity. Like, I haven't been breeding with it that long, but I started running it in the early 2000s. Picked it up off one of the forums, and it was just one of those things that, like, it's just one of those things that it was so medicinal for me, and it helped with so many different things that I was looking for at the time, that it was one of those strains that I always told myself, like, I would do whatever I could to pass that strain on and to tell other people the experiences that I had. And so that's why today I always said I would keep a deep chunk on my menu. I'll always keep a ton of crosses. It's a very medicinal strain, but I have to be honest with the deep chunk. Its biggest and best feature is in breeding. Some of the dankest crosses I've ever seen in my life have been deep chunk crosses. They've largely been crosses that so the F1 with deep chunk, if you cross X strain to deep chunk, the first generation are almost going to be, kind of 50-50. Once you do your F2s of that, the F3s of that, that's when you start to see stuff that's, really game-changing, both in its structure, both in its quantity, quality. The sour diesel deep chunk is a great example. I ran a ton of deep chunk crosses when I was in Colorado running big commercial grows. It's a really popular strain in Colorado as far as like crosses and hybrids, and I think we're kind of seeing a second coming of the deep chunk, and especially with Tom Hill finally coming out and doing an interview not too long ago, and hopefully being a bigger presence in the scene. I have a lot of people ask me of people I'd love to talk to, but that's definitely number one. Like, I'd love to talk to Tom. His genetics have, changed a lot about how I looked at hash, how I looked at Kush. It was the first real Kush that, like, affected me in a way that I was like, okay, I need to know more about this. I need to know what this is. I need to know, what it opened my eyes in a lot of ways, kind of like finding, OG Kush later, which is kind of a different thing. Like, when we're talking about actual Kush and we talk about OG Kush, we're kind of, in my eyes, talking about two different things, because OG Kush has definitely got some Southeast Asian influence. It's not a pure Kush, but it does have a lot of that piney, gassy, really, really dank, cushy notes. But I've always kind of said OG Kush is not quite in the same category as your deep chunks, your like coffee Kushes, your old world Afghanis, stuff like that. I hit up Drew before we started. He was kind of filling a slot for me tonight because I'm kind of getting back on doing these on Saturday, and I had 3 people lined up that I had to cancel while I was down for surgery. And so I'm just kind of getting back in the routine of doing these, and he was going to jump on with me. If he doesn't, I'll just sit here and shoot the shit and like take you guys' comments for a little while, and we'll just have a fucking chat between us. If he hops on, we're just going to talk shit. So one way or the other, we'll have a good time. The question here is, when breeding deep chunk, does it dominate or bring the cross when bred? It's extremely dominant. It's a very true IBL. It's a true breeding strain. It absolutely, there's, at least in the plants that I have, like the F14s that I sell currently, every plant is almost identical. I mean, almost every plant in that deep chunk line is identical. There's very little variation. There's almost no phenotypic difference. When we started with that, the strains that I started with had a good bit more variation in them, but they were still fairly true breeding. Like, there's not a ton of, by the time those seeds were released, there was a lot of phenos removed from the gene pool and a lot of bullshit removed from the gene pool. But like a lot of landrace Afghani lines, it wasn't the greatest producer. And so, I've kind of selected for strains or for phenos that were a little better on the production end. Mac just asked, how would I describe a Kush profile? The traditional Kush profile, like if we're not talking about Afghanis as a larger thing, if we're talking about Kush, when I say Kush, I'm talking about chocolate, I'm talking about coffee, I'm talking about peat, I'm talking about earth, like a real earthy kind of profile, anything in that, but usually kind of a chocolatey, coffee, Kush, when I'm using the word to describe it. But and then, when we talk about Afghans as a larger thing, the Afghan gene pool has also provided a ton of, like, when you think your Granddaddy Purples, when you think, a lot of the berry strains, a lot of that kind of stuff came heavily, for, especially if it's dense and chunky, came from Afghan lines. It's similar areas but different profiles that we've gotten essentially from the same genetics and from the same stuff. Excuse me. But yeah, I kind of think a little less spicy and a little more woody. So like pulpy, kind of like a kind of hickory thing as well. Yeah, and it's one of those things that, like, OG Kush kind of changed what a lot of people think of when they think of Kush. Because if that's what you know as Kush, then there's a little bit of Kush in that, in the sense of, like, there's still like a piney, earthy, kind of thing. But the OG Kush has like a Southeast Asian influence of some sort that's definitely got this like old world gas, like just once again, I'm getting suckered into a term I don't like. So like we kind of discussed this on another podcast last night, but I'll go ahead and throw it out here as well, is that gas as we describe it in weed doesn't smell at all like petrol. It doesn't smell at all like gasoline. It doesn't smell at all like actual gas. And that's kind of become a really big misconception, because when you get into a larger discussion about what gas profile, like what terpenes and what flavor profiles and different aromatics make up the OG Kush profile, then what we're going to find more and more is that it's not all that similar to actual gasoline. Like, it doesn't have, gasoline's kind of got this like stings your nose thing, but it's also got like a really heavy petrol, almost smells like oil. Like if you get enough on you, it's a whole thing that doesn't smell anything like what we call gassy weed. So that's one of those that I just kind of feel like with gassy weed, with OG Kush especially, that's just the best descriptor people have of it, you know? I always said, to me, it reminds me more of like a mustard and vinegar thing with some like earthy, cushy notes. But yeah, man, it depends on if that's what you know is like. Now, once again, a bigger problem that we have now is that everybody calls just good weed gas, which is really clogging up the ecosystem of names and discussions and whatnot, because, you know, it's just become like, you know, if you were in South Florida at one point, Piff was just a good name. You know, it is a strain, but it's also just another name for like dank weed. Crippy is another one that, depending on where you're from, like if you heard the word crippy, you would just think dank weed, but it's also another strain, you know, the name of a strain. So it's really become like, you know, people just calling any good weed gas. It's just the new chronic. Gas is the new chronic, you know, or kind bud. Yeah, that's a great point. You know, it's just the new marketing term that people are slapping on their Mylars with a sticker on it, and just be so they can get a little bit more money, you know, for their mids, their Cali outdoor. Yeah. Hope everybody's doing well, man. We kind of flipped the script. Drew probably didn't set a timer. I can't say shit. Like, I was supposed to do a podcast yesterday with Brainstrap. Shout out to Brainstrap. Like, put up with my bullshit, but I was running way late, so, you know, it's the podcast life. You know, I've got 5 or 6 of these that I've booked for like other people in the coming months, and I put a timer. You know, I put a notification on my phone, and then by the time it goes off the day before, I've completely forgotten. So I took the kiddo to the aquarium, and then by the time we got back, I was supposed to be on podcast, and I completely forgot. But it went well. I think it went well. I'm gonna post it on my. I'm going to throw it up on my Instagram or on my YouTube page and let everybody check it out. I'm a little bit behind on about 1 million things of ancillary life things and keeping up with, you know, Instagram pages, YouTube pages, and constantly losing Instagram pages and then having to start back over. And, you know, it's all been a massive fucking headache. Anybody else got any questions they want to chat about, man? This is one of the few times where you get my attention because I already booked the slot. And, yeah, we're going to do a Q&A on my Discord at some point coming up. Just something similar. There's tons of people that are always telling me they want to hear me talk about my strains or my genetics or stuff like that. So what I'm going to start doing is we're going to, you know, probably do a voice chat. I always feel like a voice chat with multiple people is just essentially the 21st century party chat. Like from the late 90s and 80s, you'd have to be kind of older to remember the old party chat, but it was just people jumping on the phone and just talking about whatever random shit they wanted to talk about. And back then it wasn't even like, well, we're talking about weed or we're talking about, you know, it was just random people talking about shit. And that's kind of what the Discord voice chat kind of feels like to me, is just kind of an old school party chat. Yeah, let's talk about Mechagodzilla, man. Mechagodzilla is one of those strains that is my attempt to make more people smoke more Kush. It's kind of taking kind of hot hype modern strains and turning them into Kush bombs. And so, if I want to remember correctly, that one was a Sunset Sherbet Wedding Cake, Cross of the Royal Goo. I feel like that's not right, but it's another Royal Goo cross, and the Royal Goo was Afgoo Long Valley Royal Kush, and it was my attempt at a strain that washed well, that still carried that Kush profile, but that the resin, you know, with most of those Afghans and Kushes, a lot of them aren't. I know this sounds funny because we traditionally think of that part of the world as hash producers. You know, that's what they were known for forever, was hash producing. So, to say that a lot of the Afghans that we've used in the gene pool aren't great hash producers, it almost doesn't sound right. But like your Granddaddy Purple, I always bring that up as a great example. I want to say I've seen that throw down off of pounds of fresh product, throw down a couple grams of hash. Like it's just not a wash strain. It's not, and it brings up the intricacies of making hash and, in the 21st century world. Somebody just mentioned Romulan. That's another strain that I think of that's, if I'm not mistaken, has a lot of indica, heavy indica. I don't want to say it Kush, but like it kind of has like a cushy profile, if I remember correctly. And another strain that I just don't remember having great trikes. I used to run a hashberry for Mandala, and I did a ton of work with that at one point in some crosses. And it's because it was another strain like Deep Chunk, which Deep Chunk has a decent amount of resin and makes decent buds, but like it's not a strain that I think of that makes great hash. And it kind of suffers from this similar problem of like, there's tons of resin, but it's all really small. Like it's all 25 mic or smaller, or like 36 mic or smaller heads. And so inevitably it doesn't extract well. It's kind of funny that some of these strains have become staples in our growing and genetics, because they're not really strains, other than they produce. But the problem with them still is that you have to have really dialed in environments to be running a ton of heavy, thick Kushes and not getting tons of bud rot or, problems or things like that. But somebody asked if I had worked with Romulan. I've grown Romulan, a bunch, but like I wouldn't say I've done a ton of genetic work with it. I have a couple crosses if I remember correctly, I have a couple crosses from somebody that I'd love to get around to working with, but they weren't ones that I made. It's just stuff that I kind of picked up in collecting and trading and stuff like that. But Romulan's a great strain. It's another example to me of a strain that's really heavy and that's almost being, I don't want to say intentionally phased out, but like you just don't see a ton of people running those heavy myrcene old world Kushes and old world Indicas anymore. And a lot of it comes down to, like I said, they can be kind of tough to produce. For me, they tend to be, in my experience, they tend to be on the lower end THC wise. And once again, that's kind of reflected in the resin and how poorly they make hash and things like that. It's not always a indicator, but usually if it doesn't extract well, you can usually bet it's not going to test super high either. And that's in the 21st century cannabis market, especially as it pertains to anything commercial. The first thing most of these people walk in for and ask for is like, I just want your highest THC. I just want, what do you have that's 30%? What do you have that, the tests at least look like it's going to get me super baked, I guess. Like, that's just a terrible way to buy flower, and it's just a terrible thing to kind of, if the only thing that you know about weed is that I need high THC, then really, honestly, you're getting ripped off. Because so many of these dispensaries know that, and so depending on what state you're in, depending on the controls around the testing in your, jurisdiction or whatever state, a lot of these places just farm their testing out to the testing lab that they know will give them results that tend to skew higher. So, that's one of those things that, like, always learn. Like, if 9 times out of 10, I usually say if you're listening to stuff on the internet and you're picking up and listening to podcasts and you're listening to other people talk, you're going to usually have a little bit better grasp, than your average consumer. But the thing is, man, the average consumer just literally walks in a dispensary, asks 1 or 2 simple questions. What's the most THC? What kind of carts can I get? And, that's their extent of understanding weed. And, even people older than me, so many people just, it's just weed. I just need weed. I just need good weed. Like, that's it takes a certain point where you've been smoking for X amount of time or whatever before you really even notice that there's stuff out there that's better. There's stuff that has better flavor, that every strain has kind of a unique flavor and a taste. And that's something that you kind of, nobody starts out like that unless you just have a friend that got you into weed that's just a huge weed head. But so many people, it really is a product. It's just another thing they just pick up in their day-to-day, and now you can buy it in a dispensary, and now it's super easy. The other problem is from the black market, 9 times out of 10 when you walk into a black, when you run into your homie and whoever you're buying flower from, 9 times out of 10 they've got what they've got. It's kind of rare that you have a homie that's got 6, 8, 10 different flavors, whereas you can go to a dispensary, and man, I remember running dispensaries that had 30 different strains, 40 different strains, and rarely did they know the nuances between each one past here's the here's the THC content, here's the CBD content. But that's one thing that I could ever pass on, is to be as discerning as you can. It's not just weed. The fact that people just say it's just weed is why Marlboro and Budweiser and all these huge companies will eventually get into this industry, and they'll push all their chips in, and they'll just bank on the fact that everybody's just going to buy a pack of pre-rolls, and they don't really care what goes into it, and they're not really knowledgeable about the product, and it's just, it's just scratch to them. And I hate to name drop because that's, one of those things, but like eventually these companies are going to be the people that are investing in cannabis. Once it goes 100% legal, once it gets to a point where everything is 100%, federally legal, there's nothing to stop the biggest corporations in the world from investing. And when you look at the companies that are already investing heavily in the legal weed that exists, it's huge companies. It's huge companies like Hawthorne. We all know the backing of Hawthorne essentially traces back to Monsanto, which is just old ag money. It's, it's not shocking. There's enough, cross there that it's likely all the same money. And I'm not, by no means am I a skeptic and a conspiracy theorist but it's big companies that are just investing in weed any way they can, and because they don't feel comfortable, especially at the biggest companies, because there's so much risk involved with the money end of legal cannabis and the banking end, that most of these huge companies don't want to deal with it, because there's still that slight chance that money might be dirty, or that money might not be 110% clean. And so, that's why the biggest companies of the world haven't dropped their money into legal weed yet, is because there's always that slight chance that it might not be, it's not federally legal. So there's always that thought of like, we can't bank this money. There's always this small headache of how legal it is and how legit it is. But as soon as it goes federally legal, every hedge fund, every person with a $100,000 retirement plan will be investing in cannabis, all the way up to the biggest corporations in the world. And it's already kind of like that in a lot of ways. I mean, the weed industry so far is, most of the people that I ran into that were owning companies were people that had made their money somewhere other than cannabis. And some of them knew business. Some of them knew enough about business to at least be streetwise and a little more knowledgeable about how business is handled and things like that. But a lot of them were people that had just made a lot of money, legal money. Real estate was a big one. I ran into a couple of different people that, came from other legal areas of the world. And then there were the few that I ran into that their whole shtick was that somebody told them there was a ton of easy money to be made in weed, and they just wanted to throw their bucks behind it. And then they realized that that's not the case, that there's no easy money in weed. It's not the get-rich-quick scheme that people think it is. most of the companies that I've seen from the front and the back are operating on very thin budgets. Now, that doesn't mean that the people that own the company aren't getting rich and aren't taking home, ridiculous salaries. But everybody under the owner, the absolute owner, is treated like an absolute commodity. And that's business to a degree. You can't really argue with that. That's how the real world works. But the reality is there aren't the kind of employee laws and things like that, the unions and whatever that operates in the regular world that is the way that employees are regulated through regular industries. And that doesn't exist in the cannabis world. It's not something that until it's federally legal that there will be, federal protections for how things are done. And most grows are still kind of sketchy. I don't know what OSHA's involvement is with the cannabis industry. I don't know that I ever saw an OSHA regulator in a grow in my years. Sometimes people traipse through the grow and you don't necessarily know who they are. But I don't ever remember there being like OSHA's here today. They're going to make sure that everything's safe. I've seen people do some sketchy things in grows. I've got to be honest with you. I've done some sketchy things in big grows. It's one of those things that it's as safe as you want it to be. And as long as you kind of know your own line of safety, you kind of know how deep to get and you try to stay off the tops of ladders, and that one bit me in the ass once. But I've seen some pretty sketchy things in grows. When I moved to Denver, one of the first stories that I heard about weed, and I don't remember if me and Drew talked about this last time, but there was rumors going around that somebody had been paid $1 million by a dispensary from having sprayed themselves in the face with Eagle 20. They had essentially, been given, in the commercial industry, they use what's essentially a leaf blower attached to a reservoir, and it aerosolizes whatever you're spraying through it, and it, you do a whole room, no problem, 20-30 minutes, whereas, trying to use a sprayer or a hand sprayer or a pump sprayer, it's going to take you weeks in a big grow. So, they've got backpacks and a reservoir, and it's literally a leaf blower that sprays. And so a lot of these places, when I started working commercial grows, and this probably still happens in a lot of places, is they would hand you equipment, they would hand you, pesticides, they'd hand you fungicides, they wouldn't tell you what you were spraying. So if you weren't somebody like me that had spent their whole lives in grows and knew every one of the bad things that they sell at the grow shop, then, there was always a chance you were going to be exposed to something that you didn't know. I've seen people handed sprayers of Eagle 20, which, we throw Eagle 20 around, and this is an OG chat, so I always assume everybody here has got, has been around a little bit. But for those that don't know, Eagle 20 is a systemic fungicide that's used largely to deal with powdery mildew. So essentially what it does is it stays in the plant. It's systemic, which means it works over a long period of time. And because powdery mildew specifically lives in the plant, it's one of those things that it's not necessarily something that just lives on the leaves or on the buds. It's in that plant. And so if you spray this on late stage plants, or if you spray it on anything that's going to be smoked, as soon as a flame hits it, it turns into a form of cyanide, which is, I don't have to tell anybody how nasty that is. But its original intention is for golf courses, is for places that, to control the mildew on golf courses. It's big in the wine industry as well. I don't know what their standards are for testing, but they don't smoke their product, which is a big thing. But I don't know, I've said this before, I've said this on a couple podcasts. When I got to Colorado in 2014, I probably saw 30 different grows in a short period of time, from grows that I was working in, grows that I was trimming in, grows that I was helping, manage, grow, all kinds of different things that I did over the first year or two. Every grow that I went in until 2016, when they changed the law, had Eagle 20 on their shelf. 100%. I never went into a grow in Colorado before 2016, before they actually changed the law and forced people to be accountable to some degree. 100% of the grows I went in had Eagle 20 on their shelves. And so many of these young kids, this is another one that Drew was great on. He and I talk about this all the time. It's one of those things that, like, once you've worked in the commercial cannabis industry at this point for a little while, you've seen each one of these states do the same kind of thing. They come out, everybody's stoked about weed. The laws that are on the books usually tend to pertain more to how much you can produce, how it can be produced, the safety around it as far as, making sure your grows are locked and things like that. But the safety of the actual product produced is one of the last things that's on anybody's mind in a newly legal weed state. So it's usually about 2 to 3 years after your state has been legal. Well, they've had some time to figure things out. They've issued some more licenses. Usually by this point, your program's getting to be a little bit bigger, and you've got more grows, or you've got more dispensaries. And finally, they have time to kind of look and say, okay, well, we're seeing persistent problems. We need to kind of deal with these smaller things that in the eyes of the people making the laws, your pesticides or how they affect you or any of that is usually not in the initial language. So what ends up happening is, this is something down the road. In Colorado, it was maybe 3 years after their, initial everything's legal now, before they finally said, wait, we should have addressed pesticides? Wait, that's a problem? And it's like, so many of these states, it's all about tax money. It's all about, there's almost no oversight to how safe the product is that's produced. Now with remediation, which is a big thing in the industry, the quality of ganja is going to go down, because they don't have to necessarily care whether it's great. They can always just pay somebody else to make it a little less shit. But, kind of back to what I was saying, so many of these young kids that are working in these dispensaries are just handed these products, these pesticides, a sprayer. If you're lucky, you got a respirator. I can't tell you how many times I saw kids in grows spraying openly without a respirator on. And you just go, bro, and like I said, this is in the day of the nasty shit, the stuff that you really don't want on your weed. Yes, I saw a whole building of people start to like nearly fight with each other. And that was when I realized that Eagle 20 not only has, obviously nasty repercussions if you consume it on just being around it while it's sprayed, has some actual neurological downsides. Like it definitely made people violent. It made people, before I knew it, like, the whole building was like fighting with each other. And by this point, like, I had hauled ass. Like, I was like, I'm not going to be around this shit. This particular grow was not only spraying Eagle 20, they were literally pouring Eagle 20 into their pots. So they were just spraying the whole building down with Eagle 20. And it's like, maybe the dude spraying it had respirators, but all the people in the building were being exposed to it. And that's just one of dozens of nasty things they sell at the grow shop, that if you ask for it, they'll sell it to you. They'll pretend like they don't know you're going to go spray it on weed. I don't know how many people are battling serious powdery mildew problems on their tomatoes, and they're using Eagle 20 to solve it. But I guess that's the assumption, right? Is like, and like I said, anything they sell there, somebody's going to buy and somebody's going to use and somebody's going to put on their weed. So when I say, man, like as a consumer, the best thing that you can possibly do is educate yourself on what you're smoking, educate yourself on the people that produce it, ask those people the tough questions. You know, in a state like Colorado now, the other thing that they have to include is what they put into the product. So sprays, pesticides. I'm not sure if this has changed. I haven't really looked at their verbiage in a while, but at one point they had to put, you know, exactly what they were spraying, exactly what they were using. That's pretty uncommon in the industry. Like that's, you know, once again, after a couple of years, you start to look at that and go, oh, well, maybe we should have put that in our laws. But yeah, you know, ask the people who you're buying weed from, like, is this been sprayed? If you're buying weed in a dispensary, in a commercial facility, ask them questions. Ask them the hard questions. And if you're just buying weed off a homie, man, I guess we've all done it for years, you know. But you should pretty much assume most of the mids in this country were produced, you know, with pesticides, with sprays, you know, with you know, in any way they can. You know, large-scale outdoor grows are going to do as little as possible 90% of the time. Large-scale commercial grows are going to do as little as they possibly can. You know, Drew just finally messaged me back and said he set the wrong timer. Which, you know, it happens, man. I ain't mad at him. Somebody just mentioned milk is a good control for powdery mildew. That is true. And I will say that if you don't notice it until your last 2 or 3 weeks of flour, then a little spritz of whole milk might not be the end of the world to control a little bitty spot. But I will say that using milk to control powdery mildew, if you've got a problem, is not really a solution, because milk is a bacterial mess. Like when you spray it on a whole room full of plants, man, I don't want to smoke that. You know, I'm one of those old school cats that, like, I want to smoke as little on my weed as possible. So I'm not a huge fan of, like, foliar sprays. I'm not really a fan, unless I have to, of, you know, of anything that I have to spray on my weed. It's just one of those things that I just, you know, as little as I don't even really, you know, just plain water. You know, in Colorado, that's a little more practical because it's dry as all fuck. But like, depending on where you live, you know, just putting a ton of moisture in your air is usually not the best idea too. You know, I just want to shout out Drew, who just woke up. I still got 15 minutes, homie, if you want to hop in real quick. Now, the best thing to control, I'm going to be honest with you, the best thing to control powdery mildew, and this is going to sound stupid, it's going to sound fucking common sense, the best way to control powdery mildew is to not get that shit. You know, is to have clean grows, is to, you know, have scrub down practices before you handle your grows. You know, it's there's one of those things that, like, by the time you've got a powdery mildew problem, that product should go in the garbage. I'm just being honest with you. I mean, that's the raw dog truth. It's like that product should go in the trash. Product that has bugs, product that has powdery mildew. I mean, I know that that's not the way that commercial businesses run. You know, it's all about numbers. It's all about yield. It's all about loss. But, you know, and I've seen way too many times where I saw weed that I knew had more problems than they could solve, and I knew somebody was going to smoke that weed. Like, I did tours of grows more than once where I'd walk through a grow. I went through one grow. This is a funny story. I worked for this spot for one day. I kind of came on and was just trying to get a feel for what this place had going on and what, you know, and they had bugs that I didn't know ate weed. Like, there were bugs, which is super rare. They had bugs I couldn't identify. Like, they had bugs that I had never seen before on cannabis. This was a grow that was essentially tied to a celebrity. So it was one of those where the celeb just puts their name on the finished product. I won't say which one, but there was a corner in this grow that was one big mat of mite webs. I mean, a super highway of mites. And after talking to these people, I was kind of like, oh, are you guys tossing this? No, this is in Colorado. This is in Colorado, probably circa 2016, 2017, 2018, somewhere in there. I asked them, is this all going in the trash? And they're like, oh no. No, this is harvest. We're about to harvest this weed. And I just got in my car and left. I just got in my car and left. Because, one of the things that, like, the couple of times where I kind of, went into a grow, my first instinct is, how bad are the problems now? What's it going to take to get this to a state that's clean, that's, healthy, where everything here is at least functional? And then what's it going to take to get it from that to ideal, to dialed in, to what's perfect? And if that's not plausible with their budget, with their resources, with their willingness to hire people that know what they're doing, and this is one of those conversations that's always great with talking with Drew, because that's largely what Drew does. Drew's one of those people that gets the call when the shit's on fire, usually comes in, puts out the fire, makes some sort of, rational, plan, some sort of, how do we get out of what we've already caused? How do we get to a point, where things are a little bit better? And then how do we get that to profitable and to things like that? I think the other thing that a lot of these companies do is a lot of these companies they got more money than they have common sense or grow knowledge. And so they can build a huge facility, but then the day-to-day stuff that has to happen on a commercial scale that's going to take that massive building full of gear and full of lights and full of expensive controllers and actually make them a profit, that's the part nobody really thinks about. And they don't want to usually pay the sort of people that know how to do that the kind of money that they deserve. So they just kind of have this rotating cast of whoever will take it next, basement growers, whatever guy will tell them a slick story, whatever it is. And the one thing that in commercial cannabis, in tent growing, it doesn't matter how big your grow is, the one thing that's going to help you more than anything is consistency. And when you have a different grower coming in every week with a different style, with a different, eye towards, what profitability looks like, you're begging for problems that are going to be bigger than what you can solve in a, small amount of time or with a small amount of money. And I always say that when you're running a commercial grow, especially running a grow bigger than 4 fucking lights sometimes, there's no such thing as a small problem. Depending on how invested you are in your grow, depending on how much money's on the line, there's no small problem. So once you have a real problem, a real cannabis problem, whether it be bugs, whether it be pests, whether it be mold or mildew, once you realize you have a problem, you've probably already lost money. And before you realize there's a solution that can be had, you've probably already lost that. And now you're already making decisions on, like, what's our bottom line that we can, how can we remediate this weed, or how can we, you've already lost. You've already lost. Like, by the time you're having to discuss your bottom line and what we can do with weed that's not 100%, and how do we solve these problems that we can't really deal with, you've already lost. You've already lost because you don't realize what the actual problem is, which 9 times out of 10, it's environmentals. Whether that environmentals be keeping, your temperatures low or, reasonable, keeping your humidity under control, or whether that's, another thing that I always love talking to Drew about, because the one place that I worked with Drew was one of the first places that I ever worked at in a commercial level, where we scrubbed in, we scrubbed out. You had shoes that stayed in the building. Essentially the only thing you had on from the street was your drawers. So you came in, you put on scrubs, you put on your grow shoes, and there was less of an issue with people bringing grow problems in from their home grow. There was less of a problem of, I got to be honest, I don't remember there being any major, I wasn't dealing with the production in this place, so I don't know what the numbers look like, but as far as like walk in and go, holy shit, this place has problems, it wasn't like that, man. It was a nice, clean grow. It was one of the ones that, it was on the new end, which it's always easy to be clean in a new building. It's tougher to like institute those sort of policies after you've got to grow up and has been running for, a year or years, or, people already have bad habits and they're already, walking in and out with clones, and they're walking in and out with tissue from their own grow. It's one of those things that starting that stuff in a new grow is always easier than trying to change people's bad habits that they've already picked up on. So I just want to say real quick, if you haven't picked up the new Pineapple Sorbet, we're doing pre-orders now. I'm super stoked. This is going to be one of the last runs I'm going to do with this line of the Pineapple Sorbet. And just because with the sorbet, it's such a complex profile that I don't want to get into this thing of bottlenecking what profile it is. So this F4 is going to be the last of this particular line. I'm not going to do F5s with this line. What I am going to do is I'm thinking about going back to the original F1s. We're going to find some other super unique, really interesting stuff, see what else that line has to offer, and then merge the two lines at some point. If you're looking for complex, if you're looking for different, if you're looking for something that your friends aren't running, unless your friends are already terp fans and just have the hookup on the gear, man, so many people end up coming to me after they've been through other people's gear, and they're like, listen, I need something that's different. I need something that's unique. I need something that's complex. Like I've tried the rest. Like, what is there? And so I try to keep stuff that's not one note. I try to keep stuff that's as complex as possible. I always say broad terpene profiles are the absolute best. So the more unique, the more special, the more different, the more you pull it out and somebody just goes, what the fuck is that? Like, that's what I'm looking for in most of my breeding. That, and as we talked about earlier, hash and hashability and extracts. And to me, the two go hand in hand in a lot of ways. But the Pineapple Sorbet line is one that we've worked with. There's some of these strains from the Sorbet line have become legendary in themselves. Pineapple Meatball, the Nag Champa, the Deems. Almost every one of the original Sorbet crosses that I made has gone on to be bigger than the strains that made it up. And so with this line, I really, in kind of the opus, the final act of this line of sorbet, my goal was to really hit it with as much different, unique stuff as we could get. So every mother brought something different as far as complexity, terpene profile, uniqueness, and that's kind of where we're gonna park this one for now. It's a great line. I love it, but one of my issues with continually inbreeding it is that the only way to really preserve the widest and broadest terpene profiles with it at this point is to open pollinate it and to run multiple males and multiple females. And while that's not the worst idea on the planet, it kind of goes against inbreeding. It kind of goes against the nature of filial breeding, in a sense of filial breeding supposed to be to narrow down the traits so that they generally look the same and breed the same. And that's just not really my thing. Once again, I've talked about the reason I don't run femmes and the reason I don't run autos, and it's largely because not my thing. Not my thing. And I've always found F1s, F2s, F3s to be the place that the most variety occurs. And most of my customers, that's what they ask me about. They ask me about variety. They ask me about unique. They want something that nobody else has. They want something that they can impress people with. They pull out and it's shocking. It's like, what the fuck is that, So yeah, www.terpfiend.com, terpfi3nd.com. Go pick up some seeds, man. We're doing pre-orders for the sorbet line. And then not sure what's next, man. I had somebody ask, and I think it's going to be gas. I think I'm going to work on some kind of gassy, cushy. I do a passion project, and then I do a project that sells. I do a passion project, and I do a project that sells. And the Kush projects for me are the passion projects. They're the stuff that, if it were up to me, that's probably the 8 times out of 10. I'd grab 2 fruity jars and 6, cushy jars, and I'm happy. That's it. I'm good. And so I like the fruity stuff personally, just because I think that's where a lot of the new unique profiles are coming from. When you get into Kush, and Kush is one of those things, it's kind of old world. It's Kush, it's chocolatey, it's piney. GG4 is a good example of something that kind of elevated that cushy profile, because it's got a lot of that cushy stuff going on, but then it's also got this like unique perfumey thing. And that's really the only time you can really get Kushes to perform, is to kind of find something else that has, not conflicting profiles, but profiles that kind of accentuate. And when you get into Kushes, man, that can be a little tougher, because they tend to kind of be overpowering in the profile department. And so with the fruity stuff, man, it's one of those things that, everybody has a different preference. My goal is always to keep something for everybody. So if you're into gassy stuff, I've got something for you. If you're into fruity stuff, I've got something for you. If you're into spoiled Thai food, if you're into what we're now calling the pooping fetish, fetishizing the dirtiest, nastiest, funkiest, spoiled, poop smelling strains that you can get, I got something for you. And that's always been my goal, is to have something for everybody, so that no matter who hits me up, I have something for you. Yeah, that's about it, guys. That was an hour. I can't believe I just talked to myself for an hour. My buddy Drew was supposed to be on and just got busy tonight, so mad love to him nonetheless. Drew, I got to be honest with you. The one question I wanted to ask was your first experience to wook culture. We were going to do an hour on wooks. Now we got another hour. We'll have to do another day. The wook effect on cannabis culture is something that we're definitely going to discuss. But we could talk this weed shit all day, every day. So, huge thanks to everybody here. If anything here spoke to you, if anything you heard was funny or, entertaining in any way, click a like, share with a friend. That's how this stuff gets picked up and people start giving a shit. But, I appreciate it, guys. You guys are the best. The people that follow my page and that have followed my work for the last few years are the reason I still give a shit about any of this. There's so much headache and bullshit in the industry that it's because you guys that, I keep doing this, and it's fun, and these are fun, and this is something I want to do now instead of something that's just a hassle, that's what advertising's been for me previously, is just a huge hassle with Instagram and, but a huge thanks to everybody. That's it, guys. I'm out. Peace.